so you've probably already seen the 2 examples in my thumbnail. But can you come up with 3 other animals that display external asymmetry? It's one of those questions that feels like it should be way easier than it is. External asymmetry is oddly uncommon, given the vast number of mutations across all animals. We're going to look at symmetry and asymmetry in biology. There are several kinds of biological symmetry depending on what axis we're talking about. There's spherical symmetry, where any plane through the center of the organism yields 2 identical halves. This doesn't perfectly exist, but is approximated in single-cell green algae called volvox. There's also a class of bacteria called cocci, or spherical-shaped, as opposed to rod-shaped or spiral-shaped. But spherical is an oversimplification, as they're still likely to be oblong, flattened, etc. There's also a weird symmetry called icosahedral, where some viruses are the shape of a d20 dice. Canine parvovirus is a nasty example, so unless you want doggy D&D, diarrhea and dehydration, vaccinate your doggo. Radial symmetry means there's a repeated pattern around a central axis, like spokes on a wheel. The central axis usually has a mouth on one end, and the other is aboral, or farthest from the mouth. Radial symmetry is useful for sessile animals, animals without their own form of locomotion, like sea anemones, floating animals like jellyfish, and slow-moving organisms like starfish. The extra drag is hardest to move them. This also allows for more surface area to be oriented with water currents regardless of which direction they're flowing. This improves their feeding ability. Quick aside, because I was really wanting more clownfish info after laughing at this photo. Clownfish are not stung by anemone's stinging cells because they're covered with mucus. They also can lure an enemy prey into its tentacles. Pretty prime mutualism right there. They also all start out male and may become female later in life, known as proto-androus hermaphrodism. The dominant female is at the top of the hierarchy within an anemone, and if she is removed, the dominant male becomes female, and the male hierarchy updates. So really, I guess Marlin should have ended the film as Marlena. Okay, but focus. Back to symmetry. Bilateral symmetry is symmetry across a single plane, like a mirrored image. There are 2 axes important to development in bilateral organisms: the anterior-posterior axis from the head to the tail, and perpendicular to that, the dorsal-ventral axis, which is front to back. In contrast to the slow-moving, radially symmetric glob animals, bilateral symmetry is streamlined for movement through space. The anterior tends to be the first part to encounter a new environment, so the body's sensory organs and mouth tend to be there. This development of a head is known as cephalization. So we've got radial and bilateral symmetry. There's one more that might be an evolutionary link between them called biradial symmetry. These organisms can only be divided by 2 planes. External symmetry is selected for in evolution, probably since asymmetry is generally a pretty useful signal indicating unfitness, injury, illness, or developmental problem. This theory is also supported by the lack of internal symmetry in all vertebrates. There is not necessarily an inherent advantage. In fact, it's more that symmetry is a complex trait to achieve. A lot of genes have to code for it. There's also the benefit of moving through a space, since uneven forces are more difficult to compensate for structurally and are more difficult to control. Hence why we don't have asymmetric aircraft or cars. Let's start by looking at invertebrates. When asymmetry in animals shows up, it tends to be as an adaptation on a formerly symmetrical animal, except for sponges. They may be slightly radially symmetric if you squint, but they really aren't that symmetrical at all. That tracks if we go back to our reasons for symmetry. They don't have mate choice as part of their reproduction, and they don't move around really. All gastropods are asymmetrical. It seems that this adaptation may be related to getting their important parts into the shell as quickly as possible when threatened. A genus of squid, commonly known as the cockeyed squid, has one normal-sized round blue eye and one giant green tubular eye. The larger eye is oriented upward to see the dim sunlight of the mesopelagic region, and the small blue eye is pointing downward for viewing bioluminescence. One of the species of this squid is called the strawberry squid, and its ink creates pseudomorphs that are dense blobs of ink approximating the shape of the squid itself. The ocean is a noisy place, from waves crashing to rain and cetacean sounds. But the dominant source of noise, loud enough to interfere with military and scientific sonar, is from these guys. Alphidae is a family of shrimp called snapping or pistol shrimp. They have one giant claw that creates a cavitation bubble that generates acoustic pressure that ejects the bubble at 56 miles an hour. They use this force to stun their prey. If they lose their giant cannon arm, their other arm will develop into a cannon instead. Several genuses of lobsters have one claw that's larger than the other. The large one is thick and blunt and used to crack open shells or crush prey. The smaller claw is lighter and sharper and used for cutting and precision tasks. One of these lobsters is called nephrops, or kidney eye, which made me wonder what the psi in cyclops is. It's just circle, because I guess they have one giant circle eye. Hermit and male fiddler crabs also have a giant claw. The hermit crab uses it to shield its tasty, fleshy body when it retracts into its shell. Fiddler crabs communicate with a sequence of waves and gestures, which really pleases me. Males use their giant claw to impress female crabs, since large claws mean large burrow widths, which influence incubation temperature. Since the claw itself is so absurdly large, proportional to the rest of the crab, I assumed it was selected for due to the handicap principle, where males honestly signal to females their fitness to still be alive, despite having to drag a giant claw around. Semi-quick aside on the handicap principle, the hypothesis put forth in 1975 suggests that some sexually selected traits function as conspicuous consumption, signaling the ability to afford to squander a resource. I learned about this in high school and it seemed intuitive, but it seems most biologists don't fully accept it. I found a paper that claimed it was mistakenly concluded that honest signals must always be costly at the evolutionary equilibrium, and argued that it's not a general solution to understanding honesty and deception in animal communication. Signals need not be costly or wasteful to be honest, and cost-free or even beneficial honest equilibria can be evolutionarily stable. So maybe the giant claw isn't a fitness cost after all. Bonus aside, but back to crabs. The Wikipedia page has this great animation at the bottom. The obvious asymmetry of male fiddler crabs makes them useful figures in illustrating the non-orientability of certain geometric objects, like Mobius strips shown here. I mean, I guess. Every indoor plant and tomato lover's worst nightmare, thrips, have asymmetrical mouthparts. The right mandible is vestigial and sometimes entirely absent. The left mandible is used to puncture the food. Saliva is injected and the maxillary stylets act as straws to suck out the semi-digested food. I got to the thrip article really late and I was really tired while reading it, so I skipped the cool flight section with something about trading vortices canceling each other out and shutting down something called the Wagner effect, which looks super cool, but I was too tired for that. So instead I got stuck on this sentence. Nice. Let's move on to vertebrates. Flatfish are just really weird. The longer you look, the weirder they get. They're like a fish on its side, but like with the whole face there. As larvae, they're normal, but as they grow, they metamorphosize. Apparently, they're very tasty, but also overfished, so maybe don't eat them. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game has a page on mushy halibut syndrome, where large parts of the fish are flaccid and translucent, probably from nutritional deficiency. Also, the owl and little bear is clearly wrong.
Looks like a halibut to me.
I only see one eye. Some cichlids from Lake Tanganyika eat the scales of other fish. They have two morphs, one with mouthparts twisted to the left to eat the scales on the right flank, and the other the reverse. The abundance of morphs is regulated by negative frequency-dependent selection, an example of balancing selection, where too many of one kind cause a decrease back to equilibrium. Positive frequency-dependent selection, because I was wondering, is where the fitness of a phenotype or genotype increases as it becomes more popular, such as in Mullerian mimicry, where multiple species converge visually to give an honest signal to predators. Bonus fact. Lake Tanganyika is an ancient lake, one of only 20 lakes, over 1 million years old. These lakes are extremely deep due to active rift zones that prevent them from being filled with sediment. Crossbills have crossed bills. They feed on conifer cones by inserting their bill between the scales and twisting the lower part towards the side, allowing the bird to extract the seed with its tongue. They also have one-to-one morphs for left versus right crossings, and what determines the direction has hitherto withstood all attempts to resolve it. Wrybills, or in Maori, ngutubarore, are the only birds with a beak bent sideways, and always to the right. I couldn't really figure out why. I watched a video on them feeding, and I'm still not really sure. Maybe this would be a good excuse to visit New Zealand and do some in-the-field research. If you happen to know, let me know in the comments. If you happen to know other related things, or how I might be wrong, or bonus facts, also let me know in the comments. Many owls have their ears placed asymmetrically to improve detection of sound position and distance. This asymmetry allows sound originating from below the eye level to be louder in the lower ear, and above the eye level to be louder at the higher ear. Owls with ear asymmetry can locate prey in complete darkness, while other owls cannot. Unrelated, but the babies are very good at threatening intruders. There are so many great owl facts and photos, I'm definitely gonna have to come back to them in another video. The Iwazaki snail eater eats dextral or clockwise coiled snails, and has asymmetrical jaws to accommodate. Since there's only one morph of the snake, selection pressure has led to a significant increase in levogyres, or left-facing snails. Caribou have asymmetrical antlers, sometimes with a shovel shape, potentially used for eye protection during courtship displays or as a weapon during mating season. Honey badgers have a lower left molar for no obvious reason. Humans have oral facial asymmetry, where on average the face is offset slightly to the left. This is supposedly more noticeable on babies, but I feel like babies look so weird anyway, I can't really see it. The fin whale has a strange, consistent asymmetrical coloration on its head. The right jaw is light colored with complex markings, while the left is dark gray. There aren't a lot of theories as to why this is. The sperm whale's nostrils have evolved for two different purposes. The left nostril is located on the upper left part of the head and acts as the blowhole. The right forms a phonic lip, which is used for echolocation. I'll definitely talk more about whales in a future episode. One of the male narwhal's canine teeth, usually the left, grows out into a long tusk. They aren't always asymmetrical though, since sometimes both canines will grow. Bonus fact. I know we've restricted ourselves talking about external asymmetry, but I just wanted to mention that there's a congenital condition in humans called situs inversus, where the major visceral organs are mirrored. I got an echocardiogram one time, and I asked the technician if he'd ever seen it, and he was like, "Yup, it was pretty weird."